You're watching PhillyCam TV and listening to WPPM 106.5 FM, and this is the People Power Lunch Hour Show. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber, and on today's show, we're going to have a special presentation of a panel of student organizers who are talking about their work in organizing Filipino workers. They recently traveled to the Philippines to talk to workers about their global struggle, and will be sharing that information with us on our show. Stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss this one. We'll be right back.
I'm David, but I also go by DJ. I'm a student at Swarthmore College. I went to the Philippines last summer through an exposure trip, so that's why I'm here doing this presentation. And I go by he, him pronouns.
Hi everybody, my name's Ina. I use they, them pronouns. I used to be part of Anakbayan, New Jersey, and now I'm a transplant in DC with no organization yet except the National Democratic and the People's Movement. But I work with DC Jobs with Justice. I'm an organizer there. I'm also a former organizer for United Students Against Sweatshops. And I'm also coming back from an expo. I was on expo with DJ.
Hey y'all, my name is Jiva. I also went on Expo 2 years ago now with Nina, actually, or organized by Nina. I do a lot of work with Unite Here. I'm part of the labor union.
Hi everyone, I'm Nina. I'm with Bayan USA. I go by She Her. Excited to learn about everyone and share experiences.
Two? Should I move? Can you see them?
Yeah, so these are our objectives for tonight. This is going to give an outline of how the presentation will go. So we want to introduce the People's Movement of the Philippines, which the next slide will have a video that will give a brief introduction of that movement, and then I'll go more into detail after the video. We want to discuss the challenges and strategies of organizing workers in the Philippines. Hopefully that will have a preview in the presentation, but we're going to get more into it when we do breakout groups. And also, as well as comparing strategies of workers in the Philippines and in Philadelphia, we're going to do that during breakout groups. And hopefully by the end of this event, we can develop maybe like a network or committee that can support the Philippines, and I'll be Philly based. So this video is going to give an introduction of the National Democratic Movement of the Philippines and why it's happening and what the state of it, what's the state of it now.
Revolution going on in the Philippines. After Filipinos overthrew over 300 years of Spanish rule, Spain sold the Philippines to the U.S. for $20 million. Filipino revolutionaries continued to fight for their freedom against the U.S. for the next 16 years. Over 120,000 U.S. troops were sent to the Philippines, and up to 1.5 million Filipinos were killed. The U.S. has had an extensive presence on the islands ever since. With abundant natural resources, a cheap labor force, and a large market for American products, the Philippines is a strategic location for U.S. economic and military interest in the Asia-Pacific. After World War II, the U.S. granted independence to the Philippines but maintained control over the country through military and economic agreements. The country's economy has been prevented from developing ever since. In the countryside, most of the land peasants work on is owned by landlord dynasties and U.S. corporations. In the cities, jobs are scarce and unstable. In the 1960s, students began organizing with workers and peasants to revive the unfinished revolution for genuine independence. By the end of the decade, the Communist Party of the Philippines was reestablished and an armed struggle was launched, beginning a civil war that has carried on for more than 45 years. In response to massive protest and civil unrest, the dictator Ferdinand Marcos declared a state of martial law that lasted 14 years. Due to heavy repression from the government, the new People's Army quickly spread throughout the countryside. Even after the dictatorship was overthrown, wealthy landlords and business partners of foreign monopolies remained in power and continued to abuse government positions to enrich their personal wealth. Continued U.S. militarization led to increased violence against women and children. An overwhelming majority of Filipinos forced the U.S. military bases to close in 1992. But in recent years, the Philippine government agreed to allow the U.S. military to conduct annual combat exercises and use its military bases to protect foreign business interests and pressure China into opening up its markets. Currently, there are over 6,000 U.S. troops in the Philippines. Environmental destruction brought by foreign mining and logging operations displaced thousands of indigenous people and peasants. In recent years, unprecedented super typhoons exposed the Philippine government's ineffectiveness and neglect of its people. Mass protests by typhoon survivors, women, workers, peasants, youth, teachers, health workers, indigenous people, church people, and even celebrities are calling for President Aquino's resignation. People continue to organize nationwide to replace the current system with a new people-led government that would redistribute land ownership to the poor and build national industries to develop jobs and the local economy. The New People's Army is currently laying the foundation for a new democratic government in over 110 guerrilla fronts present in 71 out of 80 provinces in the Philippines. Peace talks between the revolutionary forces and the Philippine government have been stalled due to the Aquino government's violation of previous agreements. The worsening economic crisis urges people across the country to increasingly join the National Democratic Revolution in the Philippines.
So this video is outdated because the current president is Duterte, and in terms of peace talks, Duterte, when he was first elected, his first year he agreed to continue the peace talks, but after I think the first year was over, the peace talks disintegrated. And also he declared martial law in Mindanao, which is a third of the Philippines. So these are the three basic problems a lot of activists in the Philippines identify are the root problems of why the economic conditions of the country are the way they are now. It's due to U.S. imperialism, which is evident through the military, through factories, through many aspects of Philippine social, economic, and political life. Feudalism, which addresses how in the Philippines, I think about 70% of the country are still farmers or peasants, as we call them. And they're working on land that's not their own. These lands are owned by huge landlords that comprise of the top 1% of the nation. And bureaucrat capitalism. So a good example of it right now is Duterte is the president. Former President Gloria Arroyo is a Speaker of Congress. Former President Estrada is the Mayor of Manila, and Marcos' son, I believe, is trying to become Vice President, and Duterte's daughter is the Mayor of Davao City, which is the largest city in Mindanao. So yeah. So this is Sulok, which is a representation of the divisions of Philippine society based on class. So the bottom of the pyramid is comprised of the farmers who, like I said, are working land that they do not own, and a lot of their conditions, they have to buy their own tools, they have to buy their own housing, and a lot of the things that they should have as workers of as employees are not given to them. The next class is the working class. This is petty bourgeois, which is like students and professionals. The next is the national bourgeoisie, which is like national companies of the Philippines, and the top 1% is the big bourgeoisie, which are the conglomerates that control most of the wealth in the Philippines. Okay, so we're gonna begin by talking about NutriAsia. So this is for context. NutriAsia is home to many brands that Filipino households will have in their kitchens. For example, banana ketchup, vinegar. These items are used in a lot of cooking, so it's very hard to avoid. And
I'd also add that it's like really like a popular house product here in the U.S. too for like Filipinx communities. So
okay, so at the Bulacan factory of NutriAsia, which is located an hour outside of Manila, Metro Manila. So we visited the site because the workers at this site composed a picket line that blocked all of the avenues for the factory to export their products. So for a good amount of time, NutriAsia Bulacan factory was not making any revenue because they were not able to get anything outside of the factories. So the people at the picket line composed mostly of fisher folk, people who fish for a living, and factory workers. And they've been striking at that time when Ina and I were in the Philippines. They've been striking since June 2nd because their union leaders, which I don't believe their union was recognized in the first place, were fired. And they were fired because these leaders were offered a settlement to stop organizing, but these leaders decided not to. So they were fired, and when we went to interview the workers at the picket line, they addressed that the biggest problem that they're fighting against is contractualization, which means that workers who are contractual are temporary workers. They don't have any benefits, they don't have any rights to protect them, so they can be terminated at any time. It's not necessary, like their wages aren't guaranteed either, and also like their union is not recognized.
I can add a little bit more to that. So in the Philippines, about 95% of workers are contractualized. You can be working in a factory for 5 to 10 years of your life and you still be contractual and laid off at any moment. In terms of the wage comparison to the US, 50 pesos a day is less than $1. So just think about like how to survive, how to get food for your family, or how to transportation to work every day. Like those are basic needs in order to work, let alone survive. These workers were on strike since we were there. So June 2nd, we visited them about in July 28th. These workers were on strike in a tent that was like a makeshift tent that they put together, 300 workers under this tent, feeding, not only themselves, but their children. It was that's what the condition was when we visited.
And then for more context, when we were there, Duterte's administration passed the train law, which is a tax that affects mostly the lower tier of society. It's a tax on the most sugary foods, the most fattening, basically fast food types foods that the basic masses are what the basic masses usually have on an everyday basis. So this train law is supposed to, with the passing of this train law, it makes it even more higher stakes for these workers to go on strike. So at NutriAsia, what was really amazing about their picket line was that they were able to block the ports of transportation. And when we were there to interview them, their picket line was busted once, I believe, but they were able to rebuild it. And even when it was busted again, they still continued to fight in other ways. And within the picket line, they always continually have these educational discussions to raise the consciousness of coworkers and to continue the struggle. And I think that's one of the reasons why they were so effective in rebuilding the picket line, even though they were continually harassed and told not to have it.
with the educational discussions, so for like Anak Bayan, we have educational discussions that can last anywhere between like 4 or 5 hours, but like we're sitting in a classroom, whereas these workers were outside on the picket line doing these educational discussions from like in the morning to like way into the hours of the night, you know, trying to understand what the impact of going on strike was for not just themselves as workers, trying to be recognized as regular, but also what impact that had on their communities. The power of their strike led to other factories in the area increasing their wages and also like giving supplies to these workers, like, oh, you need food, you need chairs for under your tent, like we'll just give it to you because we don't want our workers going on strike. Like that you guys are doing is way too intense, and we don't want our workers to see that like this is succeeding. So that's the tent. And
Yeah, it was a fully like functioning kind of small town. This is where they lived in for months. This is where they cooked their food, where they had their gatherings every day.
So these are some of the workers that I had the opportunity to interview. One of the workers was a college student that was studying like data encoding, but their position there at the factory was to packing 40-gram bottles in 12-hour shifts. And an example of how workers were encouraged to always be productive is that he would get 15 minutes to fix a machine, and if not, like a deduction of pay would happen. Because he wasn't regularized. He had no like social security, no benefits, even though he had like a health card. Because he wasn't recognized as a regular worker, he was contractual. It literally meant nothing. Which is why he saw the importance of like all of these workers, about like 300 or 400 people under this tent who are, you know, joining together because they wanted just to have like consistent wages and to be recognized as regular workers, which isn't much to be asking for. Oh, so this is, I think these are these photos from SONA, I believe, of the workers, the NutraAsia workers. The SONA is the State of the Nation address, where a lot of organizations and movement, people of the movement will take to the streets and like basically just call out all the things that the political regime of like the Philippines is doing to its workers, to its community, to its youth, fisher folk, farm workers.
Yeah, it's supposed to provide a contrast to Duterte's yearly address to talk about his accomplishments during his years. So also in our group we visited Middleby, which is an Illinois-based corporation that makes kitchenware. And they're the largest manufacturer of commercial cooking equipment. So I think a lot of like restaurants in Philly would have like something from Middleby. And the next slide.
So if you've ever worked in a restaurant before, you've seen like Turbo Chef, they own Turbo Chef, they own Toastmaster, they own like the soda guns. That's one of their brands. They own a lot of different like hood companies, a lot of different grill companies, Pigco, just a lot of stuff that's very like ubiquitous in industrial kitchens.
I know they like provide ovens for like fast food chain restaurants like Chili's and like all those different.
Okay, so the strike at Middleby began because the Department of Labor and Employment ordered Middleby to regularize all of the workers at Middleby. The workers said that the compliance order was sent on April 6, 2018, but Middleby claimed that the order was not given to them until May 9, 2018, and the Middleby workers went on strike May 10th. So Middleby claimed that they didn't receive the compliance order until May 9th because there is a response period that they do have, which is 10 days. And during that response period, you're not supposed to have any protest. So by claiming that the compliance order came on May 9th, they declared that Middleby strike, which was declared on May 10th, illegal. So things that workers identified were like working conditions are unsafe. There is no accident policy, so if a worker is injured on the job, they don't have any funds to like cover their medical bills. They have to pay out of pocket. They're forced to work overtime, and also there is money taken out of for a health card, but because they're contractual workers, they're not allowed to use the health card. And what Middleby really does is they divide the regular workers and the contractual workers. So regular workers get all of the benefits. They get a food allowance, they get the health card. It's supposed to be like this benevolent assimilation that they're regular, they can't criticize the company. And it does divide the workers themselves. So regular workers do not really support anything that contractual workers are striking for.
Even though a majority of them are contractual.
Yeah. And I believe regular workers have their own union, but their union is really like not a union at all.
It's pro-employer.
It's a company union.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what's really unique about Middleby is that it's located on a technopark, which is an economic zone that provides tax cuts to factories. So it's a way for the Philippines to attract international factories or international corporations to build factories in the Philippines. And so unlike the NutriAsia strike, where the workers of NutriAsia built a blockade for the transportation zones, the Middleby workers couldn't do that because the Technopark is this huge area. There is like this gate that you have to cross before you enter the zone, and there's just a lot of factories around. So what they did is they did a production strike. They did a sit-in in the production area of the factory, and basically held their place there and didn't work. They prepared for the strike by having food supplies, water supplies, but their strike lasted so long that their supplies did run out. So when that happened, Middleby took the advantage and did a food blockade. So no food or any supplies can go into the striking workers, into the factories. They blocked other unions. I believe there's only one other union in the Technopark, which is the Honda union. So they blocked that union from actually helping the Middleby workers. There's like footage of people having to throw food across the gate that separates Middleby from the other factories.
And once like workers and civilians would try to help by like literally doing drive-by food throwing. So like this whole like group of people on motorcycles came and like would throw food over like bags of rice and like fish or chicken or whatever. And it got to the point where they started putting nets up around it and like would spray civilians with hoses so that they couldn't get food in. The employer also cut off their water supply, so like they shut off the water inside the factory, and they started to survive on lugao, which is just rice and water or like whatever product they had inside the factory. So I think it was like a 55-day long strike,
Yeah.
or around 55 days, where they were once they cut off like the food supply and like any possibility of sleeping indoors, they would sleep outside in the Technopark on like the cardboard that was outside. So
Yeah, all of the striking contractual workers were terminated by Middleby, and I believe they're banned from the Technopark, so they're not allowed to re-enter and rebuild their strike. So on July 7th, police were sent to the production side of the factory, and the police seized the welding machines and also like harassed the workers so much that they had to like leave their place in the factory.
oh, do you want to go back?
So for my solidarity mission, we went and visited with a lot of different environmental activists in the Philippines and a lot of communities that have been struggling for environmental justice for a long time. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of talk about one specific community, but there's a lot of different variations of this that happen all across the Philippines. And Nina was also really involved with that community, so she can jump in to also talk about it. Oh. So we visited Calaca, Batangas, which is a community, which is a state, and we were there for a week. There's about 2.3 million people in Batangas, but only about 16 families own the entire 365,000 hectares that make it up. Right. During the Marcos dictatorship, from 1965 to 1986 is when a lot of investment from foreign capital was welcomed and then enforced by the armed forces, which continues today. So the first coal-fired power plant was constructed in 1984 with protection of Marcos. There was resistance from the community. The dominant agricultures in that place are fishing and farming. And so coal-fired power plants, distilleries, all of these have a lot of environmental risks, and they make the soil less fertile. They make they pollute the water, killing the life inside the water. So when the plant was first constructed, there was a wave of protests. A lot of protesters were killed, tortured, or disappeared. A lot of the people we met with had family members that they had lost to it. This is something that they've been struggling against for 40 years. For health conditions are all related to respiratory issues. So there's hypertension, a lot of IBS, a lot of hypertension is high blood pressure. It leads to higher risks of stroke, heart attack, etc. Gonna work now?
And because the places where they develop these power plants are so nutrient dense, which is a kind of the reason why they go there. They'll use any type of tactics to get that land from those people, aka militarization, fear-mongering tactics of destroying your home, the places you work, and then use the excuses that we offer you a relocation zone, which is nowhere near their economic resources of fishing, farming, etc. You can't just move a community and then expect them to be able to resettle easily, aka gentrification. In the US, the comparison is quite similar.
Yeah. It's also really goes back to feudalism. So a lot of these people are peasant farmers. So they don't own the land they've worked on, but they've worked on it for decades, right? Due to verbal agreements or very old documents. And so these 16 families will just sell the land to corporations and then forcibly evacuate people because they don't have legal standing to continue living there. So when we were there, they were buying up the entire area around the plant and forcibly evicting people. And a lot of these people who were evicted eventually go into urban areas and become part of the urban poor, working for factories like Nutrasia. So yeah, basically summarizing that, Batangas has one of the most intense development programs in terms of mining, in terms of coal-fired power plants, thermal energy, a lot of different things, but is still the second poorest province in the region. They have 7 battalions of armed forces there to protect these industries from local resistance. Those armed forces are supported by U.S. money. The U.S. we're going to get into the numbers, but the U.S. has sent, I think, $291 in foreign aid to the Philippines, and 53% of that money goes to the army. So when they ruin the local agriculture, it also means that people are forced to buy imported products, right? So these farmers' livelihoods are destroyed, and then people end up buying rice from Thailand or Vietnam, somewhere else in the imperial supply chain, in order to survive. Oh, and now it's okay. There we go. So kind of continuing, these quotes are quotes from Tito Petty, who is an activist that we met with, who's been like a really key figure in the barangay, which is like the community county. It's just a word for a collection of people. And so this is talking about the air pollution and the environmental devastation that these places have left. Another big issue that I'm not kind of getting into because of timing, but is mining. And so they practice a lot of mountaintop removal mining over there, which is what they use in West Virginia and the Appalachians, what people over there are struggling against as well. So the Philippines is already considered one of the countries most vulnerable to the impact of climate change. And so this foreign capital and this investment is consistently worsening things for not only like from a global perspective, but like increases the level of like, at this point they are man-made natural disasters that people are constantly facing. Right. And just going back a little bit, these like corporations, like the first approved power plant, like the one we were next to, I think was a Japanese company. There's also like U.S. and Canadian companies, and these plants are also part of the system of imperialistic capital because they get these permits from like a imperial-controlled government, and they're also funded through things like the IMF and the World Bank in the name of development. Yeah. And then kind of bringing it back to like Philadelphia, right? I think Philly has had a lot of similar experiences. So Philly and Pennsylvania in general are very formal industrial places, and that industry has left a lot of scars on the environment and like in the name of pollution, but also like the lack, when we transferred out of like mostly industrial manufacturing in the US, it left a lot of people in deep poverty. It left a lot of people in the service industry working contractual jobs and part-time jobs with no benefits, right? So even as Philadelphia is growing as a tourist destination, we still have highest rates of infant mortality. This is really racially divided. Like, black babies have a 3 times higher infant mortality rate in Philly. The per capita income of Black and Latino people in Philly is roughly half that of white residents. And we have the highest youth incarceration rate in the entire U.S. U.S. has the highest incarceration rate in the world, so it is plausible that Philly has the highest youth incarceration rate in the world, right? So even though the U.S. is like spending all this money and benefiting as an imperial country, that is also totally linked to the oppression of Black and brown people in the U.S. and the wealth stratification in this country, because it's the same 1% that are getting rich, right? So I kind of wanted to talk about some of the environmental justice issues in Philly, like Philadelphia Energy Solutions is a refinery that provides 16% of Philly's carbon footprint. It's the largest single source of EPA-defined air pollutants in Philly, and all of these emissions are like, including particulate matter, are associated with either causing asthma or exacerbating it, right? Philly has been ranked one of the top most polluted cities in the U.S. because of air pollution, and the people that like, the communities that face the highest rates of asthma, of respiratory diseases, of hypertension are also Black and brown communities, right? A Victory for Philly Thrive, which is an environmental justice org based out of North Philly, is that after like long years of struggle, the new city clean energy draft recognizes the need to reevaluate Philadelphia Energy Solutions' future in light of their whole plan to go reduce carbon emissions by 80%. But that's something that like is an ongoing struggle and something that people really have to lend their energy and resources to. There's also the new plans to build a SEPTA natural gas plant over in Nicetown, like near Germantown, which is like traditionally Black neighborhood. And that's projected to emit about, I'm sorry, I had the number, but it's projected to create large amounts of carcinogenic waste and emissions in one of the neighborhoods with the highest rates of asthma. Like over 30% of the children in that neighborhood have asthma. And I think there's just a lot of very clear links between the ways that environmental devastation is divided in the Philippines with like poor and landless communities to the US, where like you have communities dependent on landlord and unfair public housing who are like forced to endure really environmentally harsh conditions.
I think similarly the same thing is happening in DC. Like, formerly known as the Chocolate City is now slowly being gentrified, and like the comparison of like land grabbing and like land demolition and pushing out communities in the Philippines, we see the same thing happening in DC. Like, so there's a direct parallel with land demolition and pushing out these communities of their economic, where they thrive economically, and in DC, the way there's gentrification consistently happening, pushing out brown and black communities, and labor exploitative, non-regularized labor also happens in DC with like contracted carpenters, and these workers aren't receiving the amount of pay that they should be. Equally, the NutrAsia workers also wanted to be recognized. So like, we're fighting, if we want to talk about international solidarity, the comparison of like the fight that you're fighting here is the same fight we're fighting back home in the Philippines.
And then like a lot of people have been funneled into jobs that like support the institutions that penalize them, right? Like a lot of people I know are working for Aramark, which is a company that's like making money off of people getting locked up. The city spends billions of dollars on blocks of North Philly, just locking people up, right? It's an expensive way to criminalize an entire population because it's a way to keep control and keep the system of production going. Oh, also, shout out to Nice Town Neighbors Against the Gas Plant, if y'all want to get involved. And then I think we should talk about divestment. Sure. So, in the U.S., in 2016, we spent $291 million in military aid to the Philippines. Or no, in total aid to the Philippines, 53% of that aid is military, or at least named military. That number is equal to 1/5 of the total income taxes collected from Philadelphia every year. And Philadelphia has a higher percentage of its population living in poverty than Iraq, Brazil, and Algeria. I think it's a really, really big demonstration of the ways in which the U.S. spends its money oppressing other communities instead of uplifting the people who actually live there. And I didn't have a good line to end there. But I think it means that divestment is a really key part of our struggle because we are fundamentally supporting this militarization of communities in the Philippines, and our tax dollars are already also going to our own militarization in Black and brown communities.
Yeah, that's just my name earlier. Okay. So,
The immediate
It's a cover of PSL.
yeah, that's right. That is the cover of the book. So hi everyone, I'm Nina. So I'm with Bayan USA, which is the campaign center of the National Democratic Movement of the Philippines. Bayan USA is the largest overseas chapter, and what Bayan stands for is Bagong Alyansang Makabayan, or New Patriotic Alliance. So we're the campaign center of the ND movement, meaning that we are made up of different mass organizations, progressive mass organizations, representing different sectors of Philippine society. So in the Philippines, there are mass organizations inside Bayan, the alliance, from the peasants, the workers, teachers, government workers, there's migrant mass organizations, and here in the U.S., of course, the sectors of Filipinos look a bit different. We don't have peasants here. So, but yeah, there's over 30 organizations now in Bayan USA. And so we're the largest overseas chapter of Bayan in the world. So yeah, today is Bonifacio Day. Yay! November 30, what an appropriate day to have a study on solidarity and the Philippine movement. And so Andres Bonifacio was the father of the Philippine Revolution against Spain in 1896. He led a secret organization called the Katipunan, which was made up of working class Filipinos who fought for their liberation from Spain. And also, next slide, November 30 is also the anniversary of Anak Bayan and Kabataang Makabayan. And Anak Bayan is the youth and student mass organization, and the youth and student mass organization, which is part of Bayan. I know it's like confusing because of the words, but yeah, Anak Bayan. And then they were founded 20 years ago, so 20 years old.
As old as some of us.
Yeah. And then on the left here is Kabataang Makabayan, which was founded in 1964, which is a youth and student organization that was forced to go underground during the Marcos era, but was at the forefront of the anti-fascist struggle or anti-dictatorship struggle during the time. And you know, I think thinking and reflecting about what this all means today on N30, right? And kind of looking at the history of the Marcos era and the struggle against a dictatorship then, and then the lessons that we garnered then and that's happening now against Duterte. I think it's, you know, this isn't just history that sits still, right? We actually look at what's happened before and apply it to what's going on today. And, you know, even back then, during the struggle against the Marcos dictatorship, who was at the core of the anti-fascist struggle were the NDs, the National Democratic Movement, the anti-imperialists, who realized that, you know, we really needed to have a broad movement to oust the dictator. And, you know, that call now against Duterte is to contribute to his ouster. There are predictions that you know, Duterte has become so unpopular among the people that he may be ousted by the middle of next year. And that would be a huge, you know, contribution to the advancing of our national liberation movement. And not just against him, right, as one person, because we know we have no delusions that ousting one person means, you know, liberating entire Philippine society. We know that we are beholden to the three basic problems of the Philippines, which are imperialism, feudalism, and bureaucrat capitalism, right? But contributing to his ouster would be a huge blow against all those things. And so there is a lot we can do, because if you also look at the history of the Marcos dictatorship and the martial law era, there was a huge role that the international community played in his removal, right? Obviously, his removal, he was then replaced by another puppet, right? But it wasn't possible without the pressure of the people, right? But what we learned then was that the international community played such a big role in creating unpopular, or like turning the popular opinion against him, that he even had to send assassins to the US to kill some Filipino-American activists, right? Because the international community was really denouncing Marcos, right? And so for us, that is something that we strive for against Duterte now. Because if you can look to the next slide, these are what everyone's been saying. Like, the Philippines has seen the highest inflation rate in like the last 9 years. It's like 9% in some areas, in some of the poorest areas. Farmers and workers are really suffering the brunt, to the extent where farmers have to burn their own crops, right? Because of the way import-export import-dependent, export-oriented economy works. And so it's super important now to really contribute to isolating the dictatorship and contributing to its ouster. And so for us here in the U.S., that is really the thrust of the next year, is to support and broaden the movement that denounces and condemns the human rights violations, because as an international community, that really does matter so much. So if you go to the next part, so Bayan USA is a Filipino alliance, right? But we are part of an even broader network, which is called the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. And the iChirp is not just a Filipino network, it's anyone who supports human rights in the Philippines. So I think this is an outdated slide, but it's more than 40 now in the US. But it says a network of 40 organizations throughout the country concerned about the human rights situation in the Philippines and committed to the campaign for just and lasting peace in the country. And so since 2015, iChirp has coordinated these national speaking tours, hosting speakers from the Philippines, indigenous, faith-based, and environmental grassroots leaders, igniting US-based people and organizations to advance the international movement for just and lasting peace. And if you go to the next slide, this is just summarizing. It aims to inform the international community about the grave human rights situation in the Philippines today. And so beyond information dissemination, it calls on freedom-loving people, organizations, political parties, and governments all over the world to express their concern about the still deteriorating human rights situation in the Philippines and to help the tens of thousands of victims in their quest for justice. And so within the iChirp, it's people who just support human rights. It's the point of unity there. You don't have to be an anti-imperialist. If you are a person with your eyes open, you can see that killing massive amounts of people on the streets or in the countryside, seeing the blood of these Philippine people flow freely under the hands of the U.S. Duterte regime. If we compel you to join iChirp or create some solidarity committees here. Anywhere you are to support the movement. And there's a link to the membership application if people are interested in joining iChirp or forming an iChirp chapter. I believe it's if you have 3 organizations in a single place that are iChirp members, you can create a chapter. And even if you're an individual who's not in an organization, you can get involved in whatever way possible. Because really, we just need everybody right now, right? Because the numbers are so startling. It's the dozens of thousands of people are being killed in the Philippines, on top of the terrible economic conditions there. And also now Duterte has even called for a national task force to really quell the resistance in the countryside, the armed resistance in the countryside, to the point that he's militarizing the entire country and creating the conditions for a nationwide martial law. Because martial law is just in Mindanao right now, formally, but he's already deploying troops to the Visayas, creating the conditions for, basically implementing it already, even though it hasn't been declared yet. So we don't want to get to the point, right, that more blood is spilled. And so, yes, please support. And then the next thing is just the campaign, just to talk also more concretely. Because, we are a mass movement, and as part of a mass movement, we have to really employ different tactics. And so iChirp actually has a U.S. campaign to cut the U.S. aid to the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police. It's really small. I'm sorry it's not more interesting. Actually, could you refresh it? There's try to include a graph or click the link right there.
Oh,
click the link.
Oh, okay. I don't know if we can.
Yes.
There we go. We got it.
Yeah. So at least 184.5 million US tax dollars will go to the Philippine military and national police in 2018. So why does the US fund the Philippine military and police? Why should we care? Can someone actually read number 1? Nina?
According to Philippine human rights watchdog Karapatan, since President Duterte came to power, there have been over 23,000 killings of the poor, the moral, and the progressive people. It's definitely more now.
Yes.
Critical of Presidential Duterte's dictatorship, the killings are linked to the armed forces of the Philippines, the Philippine National Police, and their operatives. This is a photo from the NutrAsia worker strike breakout. That's not even a worker, that's just an elderly woman who was bludgeoned by police.
And Karbatan is a human rights-based organization in the Philippines, and they're at the forefront of documenting the war on drugs, harassment on human rights defenders, on indigenous people. Basically, any type of injustice, they will have it documented.
This is just the basis for the campaign and like our role here in the U.S. And when it comes to this wars on the people. So could you read that?
The Philippines receives the largest amount of U.S. aid in the Asia Pacific, with so far at least $184.5 million in U.S. tax dollars going towards the Philippine military and police this year.
And it was 291 in 2016, so there's still a bunch more they're probably going to give before January.
Trump refers to the Philippines as a prime piece of real estate. The U.S. views China as an emerging threat to their power around the world, and the Philippines provides a base for strategic entry points into Asia and for defending U.S. interests in the Asia Pacific. We do not want our tax dollars going towards the killings and human rights violations in the Philippines.
Right. So that's basically the thrust of the campaign here in the U.S. as far as it goes for the international community, is really calling for our tax dollars not to go towards tried and tested and proven human rights violators, AFP and PNP. Just if you go back to the presentation. Yeah. So these are the objectives of the campaign. 1, agitate and involve key organizations and people on helping to cut U.S. aid to the AFP and PNP and build broader awareness and support for human rights in the Philippines. So these are just examples of groups that can be in ICHRP, but it's really everybody who cares about human rights. Interfaith groups, attorneys, students, academics, journalists, high-profile advocates, etc. Hoping to have 100 new organizations join by the end of next year. And more, right? There was an international coalition. And then raise congressional awareness and action to help cut U.S. aid and the AFP and PNP. Strengthen ICHRP, U.S.'s understanding and ability to wage and win congressional advocacy campaigns for the Philippines. And while we realize that a legislative campaign is important, we also view this not as like an ends, but a means to really building a mass movement, right? And so if we can just go to the next thing. So just to go through some key dates to have an idea of what, nationally, like this can look like. These are some key dates that the Philippine movement is really pushing for the next year in terms of contributing to, bring down the dictatorship in the Philippines. Is 1, December 10, which is around the corner. Yeah. So ICHRP is actually launching its national campaign on that day. December 10 is International Human Rights Day, but it is also the anniversary of the Treaty of Paris, in which the Philippines was sold to the U.S. by Spain, along with Cuba, Guam, and Puerto Rico. So that's if people still, want to do something on December 10, definitely folks are encouraged to self-organize. There are mobilizations, forums happening all over the country, around the world for this. So that's the D10 or December 10. And then the next really big peak date to anticipate is April 2019, in which, it's said it in the slides before, but ICHRP has been doing these tours every year. in DC, Ecumenical Advocacy Days, right? The tour is national, but there's these days that happen every year. And the aim is to have briefing on the Philippines hosted by the Senate Human Rights Caucus, and then also to have a national mobilization to DC for congressional advocacy and an anti-dictatorship summit.
It's gonna be so cool.
Yeah. And so folks are definitely encouraged to go to DC when it happens or have your own local actions. And then June 2019 is the International Solidarity Mission to the Philippines. So if you want to see for yourselves the conditions in the Philippines and be able to share the stories of the masses there, very welcome to go on this Solidarity Mission. Just talk to any of us afterwards. And then the next peak date is July 2019, which is the Philippine State of the Nation Address and National Advocacy to cut aid to the AFP and PNP. So, like the Kasama said, the State of the Nation Address, which is basically the equivalent of our State of the Union, right, is going to happen, and so it means there's going to be a People's SONA as well. So really hoping to have a huge mobilization here in the U.S., in D.C., and yeah, national advocacy and mobilizations regarding the HR situation in the Philippines, and really calling for everyone to go to DC or have your own local mobilization. The aim is about 20,000 people. Can we do it?
Hell yeah. Also, when I was at SONA in the Philippines, I'm both Filipinx and I'm a Boricua. And I ran into folks with the Puerto Rican flag, and I was like, yo, what are you guys doing here? And they're like, we're from the Chicago Boricua Resistance, and we see the parallels of U.S. imperialism in both of these islands. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. So to have that replicated would be like even doubly awesome.
And
And it's
also
like,
the Palestinians, because
Yes.
always up.
from Palestine to the Philippines, stop the U.S. war machine.
So everybody.
Got the camera.
Basically.
For us in the Northeast, there's actually been some informal discussions of possibly having a caravan down to DC, starting from Boston to Connecticut to New York, New Jersey, Philly, and then DC. Is that possible? Maybe people interested? Yeah. Yeah. So these are things that we would love for folks to get involved with and share your thoughts and make a reality, right? In terms of the legislative aspect, the targets are members of the Appropriations Committee to influence the bill language before sent to the Senate and House, members of the Senate and House Foreign Affairs and Subcommittee on Asia Pacific to secure congressional hearing if it has not yet happened. The mobilization is one for Philippine SONA, but also to really call for the cutting of the U.S. mill aid, right? And targeting the Appropriations Committee. So that's July. So that's gonna be the second really big peak date. June is also one, but those are the two that are here domestically in the U.S. for April and July. And then for ICHRP, September 21, 2019, there's a call to have activities for the martial law anniversary and more actions to cut aid to the AFP and PNP. And then December 9 would be the ICHRP US 2-year anniversary. So these are some dates to look out for. But yeah, that's it. If folks have thoughts, we can now go into breakout groups, or I don't know if you wanted to say anything else. Yeah.
But yeah, the purpose of this breakout group is also to generate our own ideas of what, if there's something that you're really interested in doing that we didn't discuss, this would be the time to do it. And out of this, we hope that we can continue furthering the movement in Philadelphia as for 2019 as part of the Northeast call to action.
All right, thanks for watching and listening to People Power Lunch Hour Show. If you'd like us to come to your event or you want to learn more about People Power Lunch Hour in PhillyCam, visit our website at phillycam.org. Thanks for watching and listening. You're listening to WPPM LP Philadelphia.